This is Talk is Sheep, a podcast by the Wild Sheep Society of British Columbia. Come along as we take conversations that matter to you into the high alpine.
Good morning, sir.
Well, looking outside, it doesn't really look like it's that good of a morning. We're under a snowfall warning again, but hey, welcome to the north.
Yeah, it's sunny.
Shut up.
Beautiful.
Just shut up.
Actually, they're forecasting snow for today too. So
so you got to shut the city down, eh?
Yeah. At least you guys are prepared for it. There, we are not. So
yeah.
Episode 63, and we have Wayne Sawchuk on the podcast, and just very interesting perspective. Wayne grew up in logging, hunter, and he's had a lot of perspective changes over his career. And we get into some, I guess what could be considered controversial stuff. We talk about the wolf call in northern British Columbia. We talk about logging practices, land use planning. Wayne's got some very interesting perspectives being on the landscape, and has seen a lot of change over the last number of decades that he's been out there. So it's really interesting to hear his perspective, and it's a really, really good podcast with Wayne.
Yeah, I just sat back and listened, and very rarely do I do that. It's neat to hear somebody that's essentially been there, done that, and evolve. Right. You get a different sort of perspective from where we are as consumptive users at our stage of life to where he is. Right. And I thought it was a neat point of view. As you said, could be a bit controversial. Some of our listeners might not like it, but everybody's allowed their opinion. Right. And that's exactly what this is. It's somebody who's lived it and is still living it, and they're given what they see. So,
well, and one thing about it is, nobody can criticize Wayne's zest for seeing healthy habitats, seeing wildlife on the landscape, and the work that he's done to protect that through the MK. And really, really cool podcast. I really enjoyed hearing Wayne's perspectives and just hear his experiences of being on the landscape. For a long time.
One little bit of trivia that I thought you might have got into is where he's from, right? He lives in Rolla, BC. And I'm a new sheep guy, as you know. And that's where the guide outfitter was based when he took L.S. Chadwick on the hunt. Mm-hmm. Right? So I thought that was pretty cool piece of trivia.
I didn't pick up on that at all, for sure. But I know, it's interesting. He's talking about his expeditions, and he talks about all the spots, and it was the spots where, Ellis Chadwick went on his expedition, right? That's part of it. I don't know if he actually retraces those steps or not. I'm not sure exactly how his expeditions work, but certainly cool to hear just, over the head of the prophet. And, I love the story where he talks about him and his girlfriend in 84, where they're on an 85-day expedition, and they basically get cliffed out in a snowstorm, and they're stuck on the hill. And, really, he didn't come out and say it directly, but their life was at risk there. And the story about how they got off there and what was involved. So very interesting story, and loved hearing that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we said, it's a lifelong perspective that has evolved over time. And I think it's a spicy listen, we'll say, for some people. But I enjoyed it. If you sit back with an open mind and just listen, we could come with a new perspective.
So just some housekeeping around the society. We've got a couple things that's out there. Our membership drive or membership promotions now live. So if you're thinking about buying a membership, this is a good time to do it. You can upgrade, and everyone's got a chance to win. So first prize is a day on the water, fishing for sturgeon on the Fraser. And it's for 4 people, great trip. So with Streamline Adventures, the whole membership drive itself is underwritten by Wood Wheaton Supercenter. So thanks to the good people in Prince George for bringing this to us and making our members, giving them a chance to win some really cool prizes.
They're all right.
Easy does it there, Steve. Yeah. So second prize is a Frontier Men's Gear knife, a caper. Cool.
It's the Ridge line, isn't it?
It's a Ridge line. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's actually
awesome.
A brand new line. They don't even have it up on their website yet. So get your name in, upgrade today, and we'd love to have you support us.
And there's the third prize too, isn't there?
Yeah. What is it, Steve?
Oh, it's a swag package from us. Like, that's the best part there. and a Claymore headlamp. I've got one of those. Wood Wheaton is selling them and has donated, and I absolutely love my my Claymore. It's pretty cool. I'm turning into a bit of a gear junkie now. Not looking or tossing any blame in any directions, Mr. Stelter. But
I'll do that to
you. Yeah, exactly. It's cool. I really like it. They're rechargeable and they last like 40 hours or something. So that's a hell of a long time. But anyway,
yeah,
how do people get their membership? When do we run in that too? It's like August 13th or something, right?
Yeah, we're going to draw the winner at the Jurassic. So you got some time, but get your name in. And also, we're doing a drive to 1,500. So once we hit 1,500 members, we're going to give away a Yeti 65 cooler, and it'll be just a random draw. So anyone that enters after January 1st, once we hit 1,500, we're about 1,300 members now. So 200 will hopefully hit that this summer. And we're going to give away a Yeti 65 courtesy of our good friends over at Yeti.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the website, wildsheepsociety.com, click on membership. It's all there. And we'd love to have you join. We need your support to further our wild sheep initiatives. Wild Sheep Salute to Conservation. It's on March 12th. Again, go over to the website to get registered. There's free registration. You get your name in for some Sitka gear. If you pony up $20, you get a few more benefits through that. And then if you go right up to the $50 mark, you get soup to nuts. You get everything available that we have for the weekend. It includes a week subscription to the Hunting Film Tour. So there's 12 to 13 shorts that are fantastic content from the good friends at Hunting Film Tour. And plus, we're going to give away a bunch of prizes as well with that. So we got a Stone Glacier backpack for our $50 entries, and our $20 entries, it's a Yeti cooler as well. So great prize packages, tons of great stuff happening this weekend. We've got films, we've got awards, we've got a live, silent, or timed auction, and and a ton of content. We got a full day project updates, and we're going to do what do we call it? Bighorns and Brews with Nolan Osborne and friends.
Mm-hmm. Bighorns and Brews. Get
over, sign up to, again, it's on our website, wildsheepsociety.com. Wild sheep raffles are still going. Most of them are, we're about half sold out. I think our Barney's Ultimate Sheep Camp.
That'll be gone by the time this comes out, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and Desert Sheep Camp, they're done, but we still got a few tickets left for our Antelope and Aoudad, and Grizzly Bear will be pretty close to be sold out as well. So if you're wanting to get some tickets, you better do that now. With that, episode 63 with Wayne Sawchuk. Enjoy the listen.
If we told you tomorrow that elk, black bear, and bighorn sheep were next, would you speak up? Wildlife needs to be managed by science and not by emotion. And you don't have to be a hunter to take part in this movement. You just have to want sound management of our wildlife in BC. Go to wildsheepsociety.com/act now to use your voice and demand that BC not use our wildlife as pawns in a game of social management. Act now. Or the things that you love could be next.
Good day, Wayne. I was going to say good morning, but I think you're out in the East Coast, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're here in Halifax for another week or so, and then heading back to Raleigh in northern British Columbia.
Okay, so is that a second home for you out there? Are you just out visiting, or how does that work for you?
It's a second home for us. Yeah, we have a family out here, so we come out during the winter and spend a few months.
Fantastic. So how does that compare to northern BC's winters?
Oh, it's crazy here. The weather is so up and down. I mean, we get there's a huge storm, and then it'll thaw. And I guess the basic bottom line is the weather's way shorter here. We get longer stretches of weather up north, and it lasts for a few days or a week. But here it's like practically hourly.
Yeah, interesting. My in-laws as well were out on the East Coast, and they looked at all the East Coast and they thought, oh, it looks so idyllic. And then they spent their first winter out there, and they're like, well, it wasn't. Well, and they live in southern BC as well, right? So it was,
Sure.
yeah, it was. They loved it, loved the people, loved the area, but it was like there was that winter, and I think it was a particularly harsh winter a couple of years ago, and they're like, I don't know about this. So.
Well, we're coming from northern BC, so compared to that, this is a lot warmer. So it has its advantages for sure.
Excellent. Well, and if family's there too, it makes it a lot easier if you've got people you want to be around. So good
Absolutely.
for you. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Wayne. We've had lots of requests to have you on, and you've got just an amazing career with in the wildlife arena, and the conservation community, and the expedition community, and the collaboration you've done with First Nations, with stakeholders. Just so many different aspects of your career I'd love to talk about, but. Kind of the thing I'd like to jump into to start with, if you don't mind, is kind of how you got started. Did you, where did you begin, and where did all this interest in I guess the backcountry and wildlife begin for you?
I kind of grew up in it. I grew up in northern British Columbia near Chetwynd, and my family, we lived way out on the Pine, and it was a wild country at that time. We had moose and grizzly bears in our backyard and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of got steeped in the wilderness. And then I was still in high school, and we started going out in the mountains with the horses, and it just kind of continued from there. In the 80s, I started going on long expeditions. I think the first ones were a couple of weeks into the Hassler and the country, and then the next trip in 1983, we did a 45-day trip into the Spatsizi country. And then after that, a girlfriend and I did an 85-day trip into the Prophet, Muskwa area. So that taught me a lot, that particular trip. And basically, I never looked back from there. I've been going back out into the Muskwa-Kachika almost every year since those years in the 80s.
So with those trips then, for you, was it did it start off as just your personal experience? You were in the backcountry, and then it evolved into like the business aspect of it for you, or was it? Did you start right off with a business in that realm?
No, I was basically hunting at that time, and doing quite a bit of guiding and also trapping and that sort of thing. So I was hired by guide outfitters up in the Yukon to work for a season up there, and down in the Chilko Lake area, I was guiding there. And then in the Muskwa-Kachika for a few years around Terminus and Mayfield, the Gataga country there. So I did quite a bit of guiding. And so I got to compare when I wasn't guiding, I'd be back home in the winter times, and logging is what we were doing at that time. And the country around Chetwynd, we were going into all the basically unlogged drainages at that point. Drainage after drainage, we were roading and developing. And I was comparing that with what was happening up in the Muskwa-Kachika, where the land was still healthy and all the animals were still living on the landscape as they always had. And I began to realize that, hey, wait a minute, we're having a huge impact here. Our activities, our logging activities are having a huge impact on wildlife, and certainly the wild places that I really love, the wilderness. And I began to realize that, wait a minute, our activities are just causing too much trouble, and we actually have to tone down. And some areas should not be logged, and we needed to have more parks and so on. So in the early 90s, I started to get involved with conservation campaigns. I was basically logging to support my environmental habit at that time, and working to protect land bases around Chetwynd and Dawson Creek and the Dawson Creek timber supply area, essentially, at that time when I started out. Okay, so that's how I kind of started out working for the land base. And then the land and resource management planning processes kicked in around 1992. And I'd been going up into the Muskwa-Kachika, guiding up there. And I began to realize that, wait a minute, this area is just too important to allow to be eroded and developed and basically, from a wilderness perspective, destroyed. And so I started to work for the Muskwa-Kachika through that process, and ultimately many others as well, of course, had the same idea, because the Muskwa-Kachika is a fabulous area. I mean, it has just about the entire population of stone sheep in the world, as we know, a good chunk of them anyway, and lots of other values as well, mostly wilderness and wild places, which is why the animals are still there. And so that process was successful in producing the Muskwa-Kachika management area that came out of that, basically a 10-year planning process.
So with that, the MK, can you talk a little bit about how that kind of evolved? Obviously, First Nation involvement. It was interesting, in the Land of Dreamers movie that was done there. It's interesting how there was First Nations, I guess, presence, but not as a title holder per se. I guess they were watching from the outside, but didn't participate because they were sort of they'd mentioned their need to be recognized as a title holder, and that wasn't necessarily happening. Can you elaborate a little bit on that process and how that involvement worked? And obviously, you've done a great job on the collaboration aspect with First Nations, but at that point, I guess the government wasn't quite right there, recognizing rights and titles and G2G type stuff. So can you shine a little bit of light on that for us?
Yeah, when the land and resource management planning process got going, essentially the government said, well, look, we're all sectors, and you represent your sector interests, but you leave your hats at the door. We're trying to develop a plan that everybody can agree to at the end of the day. And for First Nations, that was really challenging. And so as a group, as a whole, they decided not to participate in the process officially. But some groups did participate unofficially. They sent representatives to represent basically the interests, but not the official, stance of the bands and so on. And what that did was it got some of their interests on the table, those that participated. And as a result, some of the plans do represent some First Nations to some degree. But overall, most of them were not represented. And there needs to be another go-round at this point. We do need to redo the LRMPs, and that process has already started in Fort St. John. The Fort St. John LRMP update is ongoing at this point. They're working on the terms of reference now. And I think that's totally appropriate, and sooner the better to get that done and make sure that those interests that really have been out there on the land base for literally thousands of years have to be incorporated into our plans. And the land and resource management planning process was kind of in some ways, it was a one-shot deal. We basically looked over the entire land base. We decided where the parks would go, where the high-intensity development goes, where the special management areas like the Muskwa-Kachika would go, all of that kind of stuff, reflecting, of course, what was on the land base. But we can never do that again. Once we did that, once we zoned the land base, it was essentially the end of the frontier. The land base was now zoned and managed, and for a wilderness guy like me, that was kind of hard to take. The fact that, hey, when I understood that the wilderness it's not real wilderness anymore because it is now planned and managed, but the land base is still there. The land base is still strong, and I think that for First Nations, they now have a land base which is healthy, intact, and can accommodate their interests, which they've exercised on the land again for thousands of years. So I think it's totally positive. But now it's time for First Nations to take their rightful seat at the table and negotiate those additions and updates to the LRMPs to make sure that their interests are accommodated, and that has to be done sooner rather than later, in my opinion.
Great. Okay, so let's just back the bus up a little bit for our listeners, Wayne, and talk a little bit about what the Muskwa-Kachika Wilderness Area is. First of all, why it's so important, why it's important to you, and then what was the outcome of that agreement to the redesignation of that land area. So just talk a little bit about the importance, I guess, to ecology, to you, about Muskwa-Kachika and a little bit maybe even where it is, because some of our listeners are from outside the province as well. So.
Sure. Well, the Muskwa-Kachika is a big chunk of wilderness that sits basically west of Fort Nelson, west of Fort St. John, runs basically between Fort St. John and Watson Lake, kind of that big country, basically north central British Columbia. It's about 6.5% of the province. The first time, which makes it twice as big as Vancouver Island. The first time that I went into the Muskwa-Kachika was in 1984 on an 85-day trip, which I mentioned. And we did a big trip in, just a girlfriend and I, Carol Ann Henry and I. We went into the first of all, the Sickanee, up through the Nevis Creek, Prophet River, over the top into the Muskwa, up the Muskwa into the Gatho, and then came back. And on our way back, we were following some advice from a friendly outfitter and went through the head of the Prophet, up a place, a pass that in actual fact, there was no trail there. We got his information wrong or whatever happened. The point being that we ended up at about 7,500 feet with snow over our knees and no way forward. It was just cliffs. And we spent the night up there, well, several nights actually in the mountains, trying to find a way through. And finally, we found a set of caribou tracks. There was a half a dozen caribou, 5 big bulls and 1 small one, because I saw them in the mist when I came over the top of the pass. And there they were on a kind of a rock spur with these huge antlers waving in the mist. But what they had done is basically found a track through the mountains and down a big steep cut. And essentially, we wouldn't have found that route if we hadn't followed those tracks, because everything was snowed in. It was over 2 or 3 feet deep of snow, and you couldn't find a trail. And so essentially, those caribou saved certainly the lives of our pack string. We had 6 horses at that time, and it may have saved our lives too. And so for me, the Prophet has always been a place of deliverance. And so when I was at the LRMPs, this was always in the back of my mind that we have to protect the Prophet. Well, it turns out that the Prophet is not in a park. We were not successful in getting the Prophet into a park. It's a special management area because of a bunch of mining claims for rare earth minerals, which we all use. It's from our cell phones. Rare earth minerals are used in our cell phones. And as a result, the Prophet is not protected. But there's many other really great areas that are protected. Just north of that, of course, the Muskwa, the Chiska, Tetsa, all of that is in the Northern Rockies Park. And the Gataga, Graham River, a bunch of really, really great parks, Redfern Keeley. And so about a third of the total area of the Muskwa-Kachika is in park area. And about 2/3 of it is in special management. And what that special management means is that it's specified in the plans that people who operate in there have to maintain wilderness, wildlife, and its habitat over time. Now, what does that mean if you're going to do industrial development in there? It means you have to, reclaim the roads, take them out at the end of the development cycle, that kind of thing. So it's a huge challenge, and certainly not a model that anyone would have protected if we had, or would have advocated for if we would have had our druthers, if we had our choice. Certainly that's not what we would have chosen. We would have, as a conservationist, I would have wanted that all to be protected, all park. But others, industrialists, those industrial interests, they would like to see it all open for industrial development. So it is a very big compromise on all sides. And to the credit for oil and gas and forestry and the mining companies that agreed to that plan, I mean, it did hurt their interests to some degree. And the conservation as well gave up a bunch to produce the Muskwa-Kachika. So I think for that reason, it's a really strong plan. And it's one that, it's been the last chunk of it was done in the early 2000s, and it's still carrying on. It's still live, it's still healthy, and the plan is still strong. And the reason for that, I firmly believe, is because it was done by consensus. And nobody wants to go back on those agreements when we know how hard we fought for them, and really truly believe that this is the best plan that we could have come up with at the time.
obviously there was huge compromise there, and getting industry on board is a big part of that solution, as you pointed out. Is this a model for other parts of British Columbia? Obviously, there's parts of BC that's, heavily steeped in industry, mining, logging, et cetera, that's having a severe impact on conservation. Is there a model in other parts of the province that we can use moving forward?
Yeah, I really believe there is. I think that the Muskwekachika can be used certainly wherever there's wilderness and areas that are not too heavily compromised. I really believe it does have a lot of options, a lot of opportunities for success there. I think one of the main features is that it has a board, the Muskwekachika Advisory Board, that kind of helps to oversee the area. It has government funding. Not to a great deal at this point. When we started out, it was as high as $3 million annually. Now it's about $150,000 roughly, depending on the day. It's kind of in that range. Keep the board running and the activities of the board. So, it's not as lucrative as it was. The government is still supporting it, and to their credit, because I think the board and the Muskwekachika really deal with a lot of issues prior to getting into government's hair. And I think that's a really important thing. I think for government, it really does reduce trouble. It's a trouble reducer all around.
And that's the challenge, right? We all have these competing interests, and we're all trying to figure out what we want to do. And as conservationists, we want it just left intact, and then industry wants to take everything that they can. Obviously, they've got a duty to their shareholders or owners. So it sounds like this is a pretty healthy compromise. Just out of curiosity, who is on that MK advisory board? Is it obviously industries on there? Is there government on there? Who makes
no
up that?
No government officially, because they are the decision makers, so they're not on the board. But we do report directly to government, and government can then they take our advice or leave it. It's up to them. There's no obligation to take our advice. There's conservation interests on there. There's First Nations. There are hunters and fishers on there. There's oil and gas folks, forestry. So a pretty good cross section of the folks who sat at the LRMP and created the MK, or at least recommended it to government. And I would say that the board members are really aware that they have a duty to protect the interests, not only their own interests that they represent, but also the interests of the broader public. And so, if for some reason we don't have a riverboater on the board at this point, and if a issue comes up around riverboating, people would say, "Well, wait a minute, the riverboaters would probably have this to say about it." So I think we better accommodate that perspective or that point of view. So there's a real effort to make sure that the decisions and the recommendations that come out of the board are balanced and represent basically all points of view, as many as we can possibly do.
So as we know, Wayne, things, you set a course for something and then things change. People changed. And now the MK was it 95? They had their official declaration as under this agreement?
1998. 1998 was the first chunk.
So here we are 24 years later. Obviously, people move on. And so how do you keep that culture going? And I guess that's kind of one of the things for you is I think that you're, with your expeditions, you're coming towards, I think you're wrapping that up as well here at some point in the near future. What is succession planning, and how do we keep that legacy going? How do we keep that cooperative spirit alive? How does that MK board, for example, keep things together and keep going in the right direction where there's this shared interest?
I think that is always a really big challenge. For me personally, I'm very lucky that I work with a couple of young folks, who Alex and Michelle, who are going to be potentially taking over the operation when I stop. Which I'm already dialing back. I'm not doing the 3 months expeditions since last year. I've done those since again from the 90s till just last year. But nothing lasts forever. Got a knee that's causing me grief, and it's keeping me off of those big expeditions. And that's how that is as life goes. That's the way it goes. But on the broader question of how the Muskwekachika board keeps things together, I think at the bottom line, we all understand that the land base is so important out there. I mean, it has more species of large mammal in greater abundance than anywhere else in North America. That's according to the biologists. And it's the biggest area of wilderness, certainly in the Rocky Mountains by a long shot. And that means it's a resource of global importance. So I think that, people are going to be standing up to protect that area just for those reasons alone, let alone because we recreate in there, we hunt in there, we fish in there, and, it's just a place that we all know and love, those of us who are lucky enough to get out there. So I think that will speak for its long-term protection. And I think the template laid out by the LRMPs of basically cooperative agreements and consensus agreements, I think is going to be the template for the future. It's the only way it can really go. No, we can't just have any one sector running off with the ball and saying we're going to play my game and not yours. That's just not the way it works in the MK. There's too many people involved, and we all have to make compromises in order to make it work.
Yeah, well said, for sure. Okay, so let's switch it up a little bit. And so throughout your career and being on the land base, you've seen, a lot of changes over the years. And, some of those may have been reduced by your involvement with the MK and getting this land designation and stopping, full-blown industry growth and in the MK, for example. Let's talk about wildlife itself. What have you seen numbers-wise? What are our populations doing? How do they look in northern BC in general and in the MK, if you like, as well?
It's a pretty mixed bag out there right now. Certainly about 10, 12 years ago or so, the caribou numbers just started to plummet. And a lot of the herds were in really big trouble. And they're starting to rebound now because of, some activities that were undertaken. Certainly the wolf kill, that program, which is ongoing at this point, that really helped the caribou out. I really believe that we would have seen several herds extirpated if not for the wolf kill and also maternal penning. I think maternal penning has done a really great job in bringing up those numbers again. And a lot of the herds are starting to rebound. So from a caribou perspective, I'm, cautiously optimistic, to use that word. Elk and moose, they had a huge drop about 10 years ago or so. Those numbers went down. I mean, it depends who you ask, and I haven't got final numbers from anybody on this, but I would say my own self, I think it was around 70%, maybe even 80% of elk and moose were the population dropped about 10 years ago. And what was the reason for that? Well, they dropped in the Gataga, which has no roads, no riverboat traffic, very, very little hunting, and yet the numbers dropped like a stone. And there wasn't any more wolves than usual, or bears. I mean, we're out there every year for at least 6 weeks, and we didn't see any great amounts of uptick in wolves or bears. So that points to, for me, it was something climactic that happened. It was a climate issue, and I really believe what happened is we had some big thaws in January. We had hot weather and we had rains, and that just glazed over the snow, and the wolves just had a field day. Basically, what wolves there were, and they just hammered those poor moose and elk. So that's a serious problem. Now the wolf kills are helping to bring those numbers back. The question that I would have is, when do we know that we've done enough? When are we going to stop the wolf kill? When do we know that we've have enough done? And I think government has an obligation to actually set some numbers, some targets. Okay, when moose populations reach this level, that's when we're going to shut down the wolf kill. We figure we've done enough, or caribou numbers, or sheep, or whatever it happens to be. But I think government has not done that, and I think there's two failures in management. One there, when they can't say when this program should be completed or when we've done enough. That's one thing. And the next thing is what are those numbers out there? What was the cause of that big decline? And if you ask government, they won't be able to answer that at this point. I have never been able to get an answer on that one. And I think if you're managing wildlife and you lose 80% of your numbers, I think you have to seriously look at why. And I don't think we, as government has not done that in any kind of detail. And I think that's a serious failure of management, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. And what are you seeing, just out of curiosity, you mentioned most ungulates there. How about sheep populations? What have you noticed in in the MK there with regards to wild sheep stuff?
Sheep populations, the populations seem to be, relatively stable. They're going along. I mean, you never see a whole bunch of them, and a lot of places that used to have sheep, lots of sheep, will not have as many anymore. So overall, the numbers have to be down from what they were in the 70s and 80s for sure. I think there's some issues around sheep, certainly, and one of them is the genetics. I think this is a major issue that I have a lot of trouble with. When I was guiding around Terminus, some of the native guides there, the old timers, were telling me, yeah, there's an old ram in there that his horns, instead of making a nice curl, they kind of bunch up on top. There's a genetic issue with his horns, and they kind of bunch up instead of making a nice horns. He said, so we just take those out of the population if we need to, if we see them, and his kids, we take those out too. Well, what does that mean when you have one sheep that's producing a genetic line into the population that's not a positive thing, and they start taking them out because they don't want those genetics? Fair enough. But at the same time, here we are taking all the big sheep out. We're hunting all the big guys. And it's got to the point, an outfitter was telling me just a little while ago, actually, that there's a valley, a mountain that he knows, this is in the Tashodi area, where the sheep, the horns were beautifully big and wide and flared out. They flared out beautifully out to the side, made beautiful heads. Well, they were very attractive heads. And as a result, they had a lot of hunting pressure. And he said, on that mountain now, we can't find any of those big, wide, flared sheep. They're all shot out. They're gone. And so I think those kinds of issues, and also, we've been taken out about, it varies, but between 1 and 200, it's a little less now, a little less than 100 sheep per year out of Area 7B, which is a big sheep area. And I have to wonder, if you take 100 rams out year after year, what are the results of that? I really believe that it affects not only genetics, but also culture when you take basically a lot of the big guys out of there. And so I think that, all hunters have to think about this: genetics and also numbers, and how do we keep that, animals have culture, and elk are part of that. Sheep are part of that. Sheep have a culture. The old rams will tell the young rams when to go from this mountain down into the valley or that mountain, where to find the ewes and lambs and all the rest of it. And when you take those guys out of the population, that leaves us with some issues, and basically sheep that don't really know how to operate on the landscape in the same way they used to. So I think a solution has to be found. We have to leave more old sheep on the land. That's one thing. And how do we do that? And that's to everybody's benefit, by the way. That hunters will benefit from that too, because when you have a chunk where the rams are getting old and big, well, they'll disperse eventually, and I think, or their kids will. And so I think those kinds of things have to be considered, and if we're going to have really healthy populations out there on the land, and that should be the goal, not necessarily that everybody can get a sheep every year, but that we have healthy populations that and healthy cultures and healthy genetics that stay for year after year after year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely something we're struggling with in the province right now, that dialogue, right? And yeah, for sure. So what does the resource need? And that's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, and it's not only sheep, I would say, if I may, Kyle, it's not only sheep, but all of these animals certainly have those issues. A little less with, moose lose their antlers every year, so it's not the same thing. They get a new shot at it every year, if I can use those words. But with sheep, it's additive because, we all know they don't lose their horns. They just keep getting bigger and bigger every year. And so those big guys are the ones that get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So let's just segue for a bit and talk a little bit about industry. So you grew up logging. You mentioned you'd be outfitting in the fall, and then you'd go and logging to support your habit of being in the backcountry. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, industry you touched a little bit on it, how it's impacted you as a conservationist and how you needed to do more. You've seen there was a need to do more to protect the areas we love. But, even let's segue today to where we are. I hear often that a lot of habitat related issues is at the mercy of the logging industry. So, is there something we could be doing differently there, and how should we approach this?
Well, it certainly is a big question. When I grew up in Chetwynd, and at that time the Pine Pass was basically a dirt road, and there were no roads off the Hart Highway. There was a little kind of a road to Moberly, and one up to Seconca, about just up to Twidwell Bend. So what's that, 10 miles or something? That was it. Well, now we're at a situation where almost every valley in that whole timber supply area is roaded, developed, and logged and mined, and oil and gas and everything else. So if you compare that landscape that's down around Chetwynd with what's happening inside the Muskwekachika, where it's pristine, it's a totally different landscape, and the wildlife is different. I mean, around Chetwynd, it's a big challenge for anything that depends on mature habitat to survive. I mean, grizzly bears, wolverines, and those kinds of animals that take big wilderness they're getting pushed into the backcountry, and if there's any left, in fact. So it's a huge issue. The LRMP was successful to a point. It got some good park areas around Dawson Creek, but the numbers were pretty low, and frankly, I think that landscape is challenged at this point. There's just way too much development. So what do? We have to dial it back if we're going to maintain those populations and that habitat over time, and that's going to cause some hurt. But what are our choices? We have to move to a management situation where sustainability is the number one goal. It's not just, as it used to be on the frontier, to exploit as much as we could. That's where we were. We have to move to a different system where sustainability is the bottom line, and if it's not sustainable, we just don't do it. And I think that's where we have to go. And I do believe society is waking up to that fact.
So how do we transition when we're talking about, your family grew up in the logging industry, it was putting food on your table. How do we make that transition where we go away from profits and people's livelihoods to focusing on sustainability? Obviously, you did it in the MK, and arguably it's a much smaller area. Still, it's 6.5% of the province. It's large enough, but how do we make that transition, and how do we get the buy-in? I guess do we just have to make the hard decisions? I don't know.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's just the same thing that's happening with climate change. We all know that we have to lower our carbon footprint on the globe, and how are we going to do that? That's going to hurt. It's going to cause some pain. But at the same time, there's a lot of technologies that are coming up that are very, very positive, and that will actually make a huge difference. And I think the same thing is true in terms of all of our resource use, forestry and everything else. We can do more with less, and we don't have to go into those pristine areas anymore. And if we do, let's try and do it in a way that maintains the values that are out there on the land. And I know I'm being a bit Pollyanna-ish. If you come from the middle part of the province, for instance, and from a conservationist perspective, we would call it devastation. It's development, but it's devastation from a conservationist perspective. I mean, the land base has been hammered. Anybody who goes out there will know that. And I think that we just have to move to a system in the future where we try and dial that back. And all of our efforts have to be focused on that, because it's a huge issue. That's what I think. We just have to move to a sustainable relationship with the natural world, and as fast as possible.
Yeah, well said, for sure, Wayne. Okay, we've talked a little bit about industry. Now let's move on to your background and some of your memorable trips. And I know a lot of people wanted to hear about some of the cool stuff you've done. You touched on the one in your trip in '84 where you were, you guys were snowed out. You were on the bluff and followed the caribou down to safety. Let's talk about some of your more memorable trips, and you can throw it out there. We can talk about your most memorable one, your scariest one. It might be the same one. I don't know, but let's jump into some of those.
Certainly the Prophet River one was in 1984 was a major trip, but we've done a lot of others too that are interesting. I mean, we came from Dease Lake once. We trucked our horses around all the way north through Fort Nelson, Watson Lake, down to Dease Lake, and then came straight east up the Jade Road first of all, then to Hata and Tucho Lakes, Denatia Lake, then down the Frog to Forsberg, Driftpile, Mayfield, Gataga, and then Muncho Lake. So to cut across the top of the province like that was a huge challenge. Over on the Hata Lake side, there's a lot of granite in that country, and granite is different than shale. I mean, us folks who know the sheep situation, you're usually in shale, and that's nice. The mountains are rounded. There's hardly, they don't form huge gaps and so on. That's different with granite. Granite forms boulders, and those boulders form holes in the rocks, and extremely tough traveling for horses. We injured a horse on that trip that he never did recover from that. Unfortunately, he got his foot stuck down in a hole in the between two granite boulders. Very challenging. Around Hata Lake, there was not even a trail in that area, so we had to make a huge loop back to the south to get to Tucho Lake. At one point on one of those trips, you're slogging along through the mud and the moss, and it's raining, and you're wet up to your waist, and you think, I would just like to be out of here. I don't really care where I go, but just anywhere out. Well, of course you can't. You can't go out when you're there. You are there, and so that's not an option. What I usually say is this too must pass. And we know in time it will. And, we will be back to good going at some point and out of those terrible issues that we might have been having at that particular point. But I'll tell you one thing. A lot of people ask me, Wayne, how much trouble you have from bears out there? Have you ever been hurt by a bear or attacked or whatever? We see lots of grizzlies. Of course, we've been out there, decades, and many, many bears. We've never had a problem with a bear. Never had a bear come into camp, rip up our panniers, bother. Well, a couple times the horses have come in with swipe marks on their, once on one of the horse's butts. You can see the 5 claw marks, and once on a hawk. The bear had kind of swiped at the horse's hawk, but those horses weren't seriously injured, and we've never had an injury from a bear. What do I attribute that to? Well, no meat in camp, and keeping a really clean camp. We make sure that as soon as we finish with anything, wrapping papers, tin cans, whatever, we burn all that stuff right away. We burn it all, and then we pack it all out. We flatten the cans and pack everything out. And I think camp management is really, really important. We see too often people out there who do things that just don't make any sense. Tie their horses to trees and let them paw for nights on end. Well, that kills the tree, and that's not a good thing. I don't like people building rock rings around their fireplaces. Why not? Well, first of all, it doesn't do any good. Doesn't make any difference to the fire whatsoever in terms of it spreading or whatever. And it'll be there for geologic time. Those rocks aren't going away. They're going to stay there forever. And so it's a question of not building structures like that, not building tent frames that you leave up. If you do build a tent frame, that's fine, but just take it down afterwards and store those poles up in a tree, under cover. And that way, the next person that come along, he might not even notice those poles. But if they're camped there, they will say, "Hey, that's a handy thing," and put them back at the end of the day, and you have very little impact on the land. And I think that's really key. Low impact is the way to go. We had a German couple who came through. They were actually traveling all the way from Argentina to Yukon. Took them a couple of decades to do this horse trip. And on the way through, they asked my advice on where to go on these trails. And so I suggested, gave them some routes and so on. At the end of the summer, they said, Wayne, we really liked your route. That was a great trail, but we couldn't find your camps. we never saw your camps out there. Well, that's because of the way we do it. We don't build things and we don't put stuff up, and all our garbage is gone. So all there'll be is just a little low fire spot in the grass, and that's it. Hopefully, if we're successful.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it was interesting. I know on that In the Land of Dreamers film there, one of your guides was saying that a lot of your camps, you they're used once a year when you guys come through, or maybe not for multiple years as well if you don't go to in that area for a long time. So, yeah, your footprint is not that big in that area. So.
No, it's spread out quite a bit, because that route that we were traveling up until the year before last was about 300 miles long. So if you do that over a summer, you're not going to spend very much time in any one spot.
Very cool. So what's the succession now for your expedition business? I think our president, Corey Green, was saying that is this your last year coming up here?
No, it's not my last year. I'm going to continue to be involved, but I'm dialing back the physical aspect of it. So I'm not doing those big 3-month expeditions. So my guides, Michelle and Alex, are going to be handling that at this point. They did it last year and did a fantastic job, and they're going to be doing it again this year. So we built a pavilion. Basically, it's a large roof structure at Mayfield, which will handle larger groups. And we intend to make it available to organizations and so on for basically a true wilderness experience out there on the Gataga. It's a pretty wild country. It's kind of in the middle of the biggest chunk of wilderness, certainly in northern BC, and I think we think that this is going to work, and I'm going to be involved with that for a while yet. We'll see how long I last.
So, are you going to be doing an expedition this fall? Will you be, or this summer? Will you be doing some guiding yourself? Or
yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll be involved with. We're going to do a trip into the Gatho, a couple of weeks or a little less, I guess, and then also into Mayfield and around that country. So I'll be there out on the ground about half the time or so in the summer, and Michelle and Alex will be handling the rest of that, the expeditions.
Very cool. So when I watched the film In the Land of Dreamers and stuff, that there was lots of words in there like legacy, holistic, inclusive. Let's talk a little bit about your legacy, Wayne. When you look back on your career and what you've done, and your professional career, your conservation career, your outfitting career, logging career, what's your legacy? What have you left for this the next generation and those to come?
That's hard for me to sum up. I kind of like to leave that to others, but I'll tell you, the Muskwa-Kachika is certainly one of the things that I'll feel the proudest about, because it took so long. It's a decade of work just to get it developed, just to get it created, and I think there's a bigger picture here. The First Nations speak of Dechin, which is basically an area that is left for the future, which is meant to be kept for the people when times get bad, that they can experience the wilderness and basically a place of solace and comfort and keeping them alive. And I think that concept is a good one for the Muskwa-Kachika, and I think for myself, if I've done nothing more than let people know that the Muskwa-Kachika is so important, and it is a Dechin. It is a place of solace, not only for First Nations but for everyone who goes there, and that we're so lucky to have it. I think if that's what I've accomplished during my life, then I think that's plenty for me. I think that's a fine thing that I'll be happy to leave behind.
Yeah, huge accomplishment, absolutely, for sure, Wayne. Let's talk a little bit about your books, the films you've been involved in. You were on CBC back in the 80s talking about wildlife and conservation. Let's talk about some of your communications and your outreach work, and for any of our listeners, if they want to learn a little bit more about your past and your history and your ethics, where can they go and talk about some of the reading you have available and some of the work you've done there?
Sure. Well, it's been my pleasure to basically cart a camera around with me whenever I go out into the mountains, which I've been, doing for so many decades now. I've got a lot of photographs of a lot of wild and beautiful places, and many of those have been used in a couple of the books. Muskoka-Chica, the Wild Heart of Canada's Northern Rockies, is a large format photo book that I've produced, and then most recently, Crossing the Divide: Discovering a Wilderness Ethic in Canada's Northern Rockies. And this one is the newest one deals with a bunch of the issues that are out there on the ground. Both from my own perspective and on a broader level, how we treat the wild places that we've been essentially entrusted with. And coming out of those, or I guess a parallel track, is some of the films that I've helped to work on, and meeting fantastic people like Ryan Dickey, who also starred, or I guess was involved with the In the Land of Dreamers, which has just come out, and that is an amazing piece, and it's my pleasure to be involved with all those folks, the Casca, and all the people who are involved in that movie, because I think they really feel for the land in much the same way. We might be coming from different perspectives, but we all appreciate the land in the same way. And I think the hunters as well, sheep hunters, man, those guys get up high. And when you're on top of a mountain and you're looking around and you're seeing, okay, there may be some sheep on those mountains, but wow, look at that country. I think that gets into your soul, and I don't think that's something you can forget. And if my books kind of bring a little bit of that home for people, I think then they'll have done their jobs. And certainly, I think In the Land of Dreamers is amazing what the filmmakers Risky Creek did there. That thing is, I think it's an amazing piece from my perspective, and I know people will get a different experience of the Muskoka-Chica than they've ever had by watching that.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating film. So, can you talk a little bit about that, having just released it now? And I guess you're doing. Are you doing a release somewhere else? You're doing a Q&A session or something on another platform coming up here in the next few days. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's right. There's one on Y2Y, Yellowstone to Yukon. We're doing a screening of the movie In the Land of Dreamers, and that's on the 8th of February. And so Ryan Dickey and I think Jillian Stavely as well from the Casca will be on that call and giving our perspectives on In the Land of Dreamers. Yeah, and Crossing the Divide was basically, it's a set of stories that have kind of, they're the ones that have kind of popped up over time. That, hey, this thing has a lesson for me. They bothered me and got me to write for some reason, and so that's why I'm quite proud of it for that reason. It tells the stories of growing up on the Pine, and my mom and dad, who were quite different. My mom was kind and gentle and never killed a thing in her life, and my dad was a total hunter. So those two perspectives were kind of pulling me back and forth my entire life. And that story is fleshed out in Crossing the Divide.
So for yourself, you don't identify either way. You're not a hardcore killer. You're not a complete advocate for not hunting. You're kind of somewhere in the middle, and you see both perspectives and kind of see it both ways, eh? Yeah,
exactly. And I think we all have eye teeth, right? And the eye teeth mean that we're at least omnivores, if not carnivores, and that means a partial meat diet. Well, you're not going to find meat just laying around. Generally speaking, you have to go out and kill it. So I don't think from an ethical perspective it's out of line. I think we humans have done that for our entire lives, but I think or our entire history, I should say. But how do you do it, and when? And I think before we embark on killing an animal, I think there's a couple of questions that we have to ask ourselves. And the first one is, do I have a reason? What's my reason to kill this animal? And okay, you got a good reason. Then the next question is, can I do it with an ethic of respect? Can I respect the animal at the same time as I'm going to kill it? Well, that's a little bit of a harder hump. But I think all of us who take that step have to ask ourselves those two questions. And I think if we did, I think we would find a different way of relating to the world, to the earth, and to the animals themselves. And that's what I've done. So I haven't stopped, predating on wildlife. I still have the trap line, and I'm still out there trapping in the wintertime. But I don't hunt for fun anymore, because for me personally, it's not where my head's at. It doesn't meet my ethic. But everyone has to answer that question for themselves. I think that's the important thing.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. So in the Land of Dreamers, if people want to watch it, how can they see it? And just give us an overview, I guess a 50,000 foot overview of what that film encompasses and why it's so important, I guess, what it's relating.
Well, this film kind of crossed the divide, I guess you could say it. It certainly encompasses some of my perspective and the conservationist perspective. It also really focuses on First Nations and their role in the Muskwa-Kachika. I mean, we have to remember, we're coming over a divide between the Prophet and the Muskwa. Way up high on the mountains, there's hardly any place to camp up there. And here's a little spot where a moose has dug out a moose hole in the moss. And I'm unpacking the pack horses. There's just a little clearing there, just big enough to camp in. I look down in the hole, and there are flakes. Some hunter has made a stone tool there in the far distant past. We don't know how long ago. It could have been 500 years or 1,000 years, whatever. But the point is that they were actually there doing that for many, many decades, if not hundreds or thousands of years. And I think the film brings that out really strongly, that, there's a long history here that we as settlers, us white folks as settlers, will not have an idea about, except what we've read or heard. And I think that representing those two sides is so important for the Muskwa-Kachika, because in the long run, it's not only looking back, but we have to look ahead, for 7 generations, and make sure this place survives into the future for everybody, not just First Nations, but everybody who wants to experience true wilderness. So, and I think in the Land of Dreamers kind of sets a stage for that, I believe.
Well said. Absolutely. Yeah. It's taking that long shot, and we all, that's the interesting thing with wildlife management. We see all these problems in BC and we're like, well, let's just go out and fix them. And like you said, it's 7 generations. I think that First Nations perspective about looking, and we don't think in terms of weeks or days or months, or, we're thinking decades and centuries, and the legacy we're leaving. I think that they've certainly done a pretty good job of looking down the road, and maybe something that we could do a better job of in modern times. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, we all have one goal, and that's maintain what's out there on the land base, both, the white community and First Nations as well, all of us. And many others.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. Okay, so if somebody wants to go and get your books, I'll put the links on our podcast for that. In the Land of Dreamers, just I guess a quick Google search with your name, that in the Land of Dreamers, and CBC. It's a CBC production, correct?
It is. Yeah, you can watch it on CBC Gem. Just go CBC Gem and documentaries, and it'll pop up.
Okay, sounds great. We'll make sure we share that as well. And any chance we could have you back for a webinar, and you could share some of your pictures and some of your stories, and do a little storytelling for us one of these days?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I wouldn't mind doing is talking over some of the issues with folks. I think if people wanted to do a call in or whatever, that would be great too. There's a lot of issues out there, and I may not be answering all those questions because people haven't asked them, but I'd be happy to do that if I could.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Wayne. And that's the thing is, I think having that local knowledge as somebody that's been on the land base, and that's where First Nations is so important in these discussions. But, the local guides and outfitters that have been out there for years on the landscape and experiencing, climate change and experiencing population change. And again, our government doesn't have all the answers. They admittedly don't know why some of these habitats are being influenced the way they are, or these populations are. But yourself that's been there year and year after year after year after year and seeing these on the landscape, you have a really good appreciation in a different way than a biologist sitting in Victoria might have, right? So I think that's a really important part of the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And one of those issues that's coming up right now, of course, is the burning issue and how much burning should be done in the Muskoka-Chika. That's a question that I think is going to, still needs a bunch of answering. There's not very many burn permits being issued right now. And from my perspective, if we just leave the burning to willy-nilly lightning strikes or whatever, it's probably not going to meet our goals as far as habitat goes. And I really do believe we do need to have a burning program that is rational, it makes sense, that accommodates the species and basically puts a little more early sorrel on the landscape. That's my own belief, because I've seen what happens out there without it. We start to lose species. Numbers start to go down. It's not as healthy from a whole bunch of perspectives. So that's just one issue that is kind of topical right now.
Yeah, it certainly is for us at the Wild Sheep Society BC. It's something that we've spent an inordinate amount of time, money, and effort trying to make these work. And it's pretty frustrating when we're doing everything we can and we're still we're not getting the regulatory approvals to get things done. So pretty frustrating at times, but especially when we know it's going to help. It's going to help wildlife. It's going to help habitat. It's win-win, right? So
absolutely, yeah, for sure. From my perspective, at least.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, mine too. So, well, Wayne, we appreciate your time and really enjoyed this chat today. And yeah, let's do this again. I'd love to have you on a webinar and talk about some of your trips and share some of your experiences and your photos. And then, have an opportunity for our listeners to weigh in with some questions and for you and talk about some of these more divisive issues. It's great to get it, bring these things up and think about it in a different perspective. And certainly from your perspective of being on the land base for decades and seeing things change and what you'd like to see a bit differently. It's certainly important to hear that.
Well, thank you, Kyle. I'd certainly be happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, have a great day. And
all right.
Thanks again, Wayne.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Steve.